When Elias inherited the cabin from his estranged grandfather, he expected dust, spiders, and maybe a busted chimney, not 4 towering women already living inside. Each stood over 7 feet tall, raw-boned and sun-browned from a lifetime of labor, their gazes more curious than hostile. "You came," one whispered, as if they'd been waiting their whole lives. What Elias didn't know was that his inheritance included more than just land. It came with an old promise sealed in blood, muscle, and longing. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this pull you in the way they pulled Elias off his feet, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's chapter gets even stranger and a whole lot hotter. Elias didn't believe in fate, but as the rental car rattled up the gravel path, tires spitting out stones, he had to admit this didn't feel random. The cabin stood alone at the top of the ridge, its slanted tin roof streaked with rust, its porch sagging slightly to the left like it was tired of standing. But it was real. Just like the letter had said, to Elias H. Ward, sole heir. Property deed enclosed, do what you will. He hadn't known his grandfather. Just stories, some wild, some tender, most half-true. A reclusive man who had once been a foreman, a fighter, maybe even a fugitive, depending on which of Elias's aunts was drinking. But this place, it felt too alive to be abandoned. The key stuck a little in the lock. He had to lean into it, the wood swollen from mountain moisture. The door creaked open with a low groan, and the smell hit him first: cedar, smoke, and something faintly sweet beneath it all. Inside, the air was warm, too warm. A cast-iron stove in the corner still glowed faintly red. Beside it, stacked neatly on a table, were bundles of wild herbs and what looked like freshly skinned rabbit, cleaned and ready for cooking. Elias froze. There was no dust. The shelves were full of jars, pickled things, dried things, tinctures in old glass bottles with faded handwritten labels. The floors had been swept recently. A damp cloth still sat on the kitchen counter, and near the sink, a cup of water half drunk. He backed out slowly, the hairs on his arms rising. "Hello?" he called. No answer. "Is anyone? I just inherited this place. I'm not here to cause trouble." Still nothing. But behind the cabin, he thought he heard something, the crack of branches. Elias stepped around to the back. The yard sloped into a clearing, and there, planted into the earth, was a large wooden post, a kind of totem carved roughly, with 4 names etched in different hands. Below it, the dirt had been recently disturbed. He turned back toward the cabin and froze. There was someone in the window, a silhouette, broad, still, gone in the blink of an eye. Elias's heart jumped. He reached instinctively for the box cutter in his back pocket, gripping it with a hand he hoped wasn't shaking. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, but inside, the cabin had gone silent. And yet the stove was still warm, and something told him, without understanding how, that he wasn't alone. He should have left. He knew that. Instead, Elias stepped back inside, heart pounding, and locked the door behind him. Outside, somewhere in the tree line, 4 sets of eyes watched from the shadows. Waiting. He shouldn't have slept, not with the stove warm and a half-eaten rabbit waiting for whoever had just stepped out. Not with a shadow in the window, not with that strange feeling he couldn't shake that something was watching him and choosing not to speak. But exhaustion always wins. Elias had thrown his sleeping bag over the cot in the corner room. He had no intention of making himself too comfortable, just long enough to rest and get his bearings. Maybe drive back down the mountain come morning, pretend the whole thing never happened. He woke to the sound of breathing, multiple, slow, deep, too synchronized to be natural. Elias's eyes snapped open, and his entire body went rigid. The room was lit only by moonlight streaming through the broken blinds. Shadows painted the wood-paneled walls, and there they were, 4 women, standing shoulder to shoulder around his cot. Massive, all of them, towering and broad-shouldered, each shaped like they'd been carved from mountainside. They didn't speak, didn't move, just stood in a perfect semicircle, watching him like he was a creature pinned under glass. One had long black braids that reached her hips, her eyes dark and steady. Another, blonde and freckled, arms crossed over a chest that could have benched his weight twice over. The third had auburn hair and the stillness of a statue, tall, taut, unreadable. And the last, the one closest to him, was scarred across her left cheek, her eyes downcast like she was too shy to meet his gaze. He tried to speak. His throat was dry. Who are you?" The blonde tilted her head slightly, but none of them answered. I inherited this place. From my grandfather. I didn't know anyone was here. Finally, the scarred one spoke. Her voice was soft, almost too soft for someone so enormous. You smell like him. The room seemed to pulse. Elias sat up slowly, every muscle tense. What? The man who promised, she said. And just like that, the blonde stepped forward. Her boots barely made a sound on the floorboards, but her presence hit like a wave. She leaned down slowly, deliberately, until her face was inches from his. You're smaller than we imagined, she said, as if it were a sad fact, not an insult. The auburn one nodded. But he's real. He's ours, said the last, the one with braids. That was when Elias finally found his courage and his voice. Look, I don't know what this is, but I think there's been a mistake. I just got here. I didn't promise anything. The scarred one met his eyes, finally. Hers were the color of storm clouds over mountains. No, she said. But he did. And now you're the one who has to finish it. They turned in perfect unison, disappearing down the hallway, leaving him breathless and shivering beneath the weight of words he didn't understand. The next morning, Elias sat at the kitchen table with a mug of bitter coffee he'd found in a tin on the shelf. He hadn't slept after they left his room. His heart was still thudding from the sight of them four living, breathing impossibilities who had moved like a single mind and then vanished down the hall as if the house belonged to them. Sunlight crept across the floorboards, catching on scuff marks shaped like boots far larger than his own. He hadn't imagined them. They were real, and they'd spoken about him like he was the last piece of some puzzle. He was halfway through his second mug when the door creaked open. The scarred one entered first, moving slowly, almost apologetically. She was barefoot. Behind her came the others, the braided woman with her steady gaze, the blonde with her powerful arms crossed, and the auburn-haired one whose expression gave nothing away. Elias stood automatically, gripping the back of the chair like it might anchor him. Listen, he said, I don't know what you think is going on, but this is my cabin now. I inherited it legally. You're trespassing. The scarred one didn't flinch. This was never about paper, she said softly. This is about a promise. The blonde placed something on the table between them, an envelope thick with folded papers. It smelled faintly of pine and age. Read it, she said. Elias hesitated, then slid the papers out. They were yellowed but intact, written in his grandfather's unmistakable angular script. Ward Settlement Agreement, 1981. Beneath the title were lines of text that made his stomach twist. In exchange for the keeping of the land and the protection of its 4 daughters, I, Harland Ward, agree that my blood shall return when called. The heir to this cabin will honor what was begun. What is this? Elias whispered. The old contract, the auburn-haired woman said. Your grandfather made it with our mothers. They raised us here, taught us to work the land, to wait. We have kept our side. You expect me to? He trailed off. The words felt too heavy in his mouth. We expect you to finish what he started, the braided one said. To make this place whole again. Elias dropped the papers on the table like they burned. This isn't binding. It's just a piece of paper. He had no right to sign anything for me. The scarred one's eyes flickered, and for the first time he saw something like pain there. He had no right to leave us either, she said quietly. But here we are. The 4 women stood silent, watching him. He felt small in the kitchen, not just physically but historically, like he had stepped into a story that had begun long before he was born. Somewhere outside, a raven called once, sharp and cold. Inside, the contract lay between them like a living thing. Elias stayed, not out of courage, but out of confusion. And maybe, just maybe, because something deep inside him was curious. Not just about the contract or the cabin, but about them. The women didn't press him after that first morning. They let him be. For 3 days, Elias watched them move through the land like they were part of it. Each morning before sunrise, they left the cabin together. Each evening, they returned dust-covered, sweat-slicked, and silent. They were builders, hunters, craftsmen. One evening, Elias followed. The path behind the cabin led to a clearing he hadn't noticed before, fenced in and thick with wild vegetables. The blonde, the one with the quiet thunder in her every step, was carrying a massive log across her shoulders like it weighed nothing. She dropped it beside a half-built wall and turned to him. You're watching, she said. Elias shrugged, trying to understand. She smiled, but it wasn't soft. It was edged with something sharper. Understand what? You. This place. What this is. The braided one appeared then, kneeling beside a forge set up near the tree line. Sparks leapt as she stoked the coals. She didn't say a word, just watched him with those calm, unreadable eyes. The auburn-haired woman was stacking cured hides nearby. She had removed her outer shirt, leaving her arms bare, thick with muscle, freckled from Sunday. And then the scarred one stepped into view, wiping blood from her knife. "You want to understand?" she asked. "Then work." They handed him a shovel. It was heavier than he expected. The dirt was dry, stubborn. After 20 minutes, his shoulders burned. After 40, his palms had blistered. He collapsed beside the forge, panting. The braided one handed him a jug of water. "You're weaker than we expected," she said. But her tone wasn't cruel, just honest. Elias drank deeply. "And you're different from anyone I've ever met," the blonde chuckled from the fence. "We've never met anyone like you either. That's kind of the point." He looked up at her. "Why wait? Why build all this and live like this just to serve some old agreement?" The scarred one answered. "Because we were born for something we haven't done yet." There was a silence after that. Not awkward. Heavy. Like the whole mountain was holding its breath. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, looking out at the dark treetops, remembering the strength in their shoulders, the calluses on their hands, the way their eyes lingered not with menace but with something raw. Need. Not of the body. Not yet. But something close. And for the first time, Elias didn't want to run. Elias didn't know he was being tested until he lost. It started with the axe. The braided one, Mira. He finally learned her name, handed it to him without a word, and pointed at the fallen log near the stump. She split hers clean in one stroke. Elias needed 4. The axe nearly toppled him twice, and by the end, his arms were shaking. The others watched from the porch, the blonde with folded arms and a bemused smirk, the auburn one sitting on the railing sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes, and the scarred leader standing beside her, eyes unreadable. No one laughed, no one mocked. But Elias felt the weight of being seen. Fully. Later that day, he tried to help with cooking. The blonde, her name was Hilda, gave him a basket of root vegetables and a knife that felt too big for his hand. She worked beside him, her fingers moving fast, precise. Elias cut himself twice. When Hilda saw the blood, she didn't scold. She gently pulled his hand under the lantern light and cleaned it with a touch more careful than he expected from someone built like a barn door. "You're not soft," she said quietly. "Just different." The others seemed to be watching for something, not strength, not skill, but something else entirely. Endurance, maybe. Willingness. On the third night, they challenged him to a game. "First to make someone laugh wins," said the auburn-haired one, Vera. She hadn't smiled once since he'd arrived. Elias tried. He told a dumb story from his college days about getting locked out of a dorm in nothing but a towel. Nothing. Then he imitated his landlord's accent. That got a twitch from Mira. He flailed, fumbled, made a complete fool of himself. And still, nothing. Until finally, while mimicking a rooster with a limp, a sound broke from the porch. A single, sharp snort. It came from the scarred one. Elias turned in shock. Was that? She looked away quickly, but her cheeks were flushed. He had won. Somehow. That night, the air in the cabin shifted. Softer. After dinner, they let him sit closer to the fire. Mira passed him a blanket without a word. Hilda brought over a half-finished piece of embroidery and let him ask questions about the patterns. Vera showed him how to sharpen a blade slowly, like she wanted him to learn it right. And the scarred one, Lena, finally said his name, Elias. Just that. Just once. But it landed like a promise. He didn't know what being chosen meant yet. Not fully, but he knew now it didn't mean being the strongest, or the smartest, or the fastest. It meant staying. Even when you didn't understand everything, even when your hands blistered, even when your heart was starting to want things it couldn't name yet. The fire crackled low that night, its glow brushing against 4 shadows and 1 outsider. Elias sat cross-legged on a woven rug, a steaming bowl of stew in his lap, unsure whether the silence between them was comfort or ceremony. It had been 2 weeks since he arrived. 2 weeks of aching limbs, awkward attempts at connection, and stolen glances he was trying not to misinterpret. 2 weeks of learning how to live inside their world instead of just observing it. That night, something changed. Vera, sharp-eyed, auburn-haired, always watching, set her bowl aside and said, "Do you want to know what we are?" Elias blinked. "I thought I was starting to." Mira stood, towering over them in the firelight. She knelt beside the hearth and pulled a small wooden box from beneath the floorboards. When she opened it, Elias saw a folded cloth and a braided silver band, tarnished but beautiful. Lena, the scarred one, took it in her hands and held it as if it were a holy object. "This was our mother's vow band," she said quietly. "They made it the night they sealed the contract with your grandfather." The band glinted in the firelight. "Your grandfather was supposed to stay," Hilda added, her voice softer than usual, "to help start a new generation, one built with care, trust, strength." Elias frowned. "You're saying he was supposed to? Father children?" "No," Lena said. "He was supposed to be a father, a partner, a protector, not just a man who passed through." Vera stood, pacing once. Her voice was steel. "But he left. Took what he needed and ran when he got scared. Left 4 women behind to raise us alone, with nothing but a promise." The air in the room thickened. Elias set his bowl aside. "And now you think I'm supposed to what? Fix that?" "No," Mira said, surprising him. "You're supposed to choose." "Choose what?" Lena's eyes didn't leave his. "Whether you will become part of what was started, not because of obligation, because you want to. And if I don't?" Vera's face didn't change. "Then we let you go. No harm, no chasing, no punishment." That silenced him. He looked at each of them. The curve of Mira's jaw, still smudged with ash. The freckled fire of Hilda's shoulders, twitching as if bracing for rejection. The sharp alertness in Vera's posture, and Lena steady, weathered, hopeful. "You're all..." Elias hesitated, then asked the question hanging unspoken. "You've never been with anyone?" Lena nodded once. "Not even a kiss." He exhaled slow. "Why?" "Because the promise was sacred," Mira said simply. "And if the next man we let close was meant to be our beginning, we weren't going to waste ourselves on men who didn't understand what it meant to stay." The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was bare, like truth stripped everything else away. That night, Elias didn't touch anyone, but he didn't sleep alone. They sat around him like a wall of warmth. 4 massive, untouched women, and one very small man learning what it meant to be trusted. Elias ran. He hadn't planned to. He'd woken before dawn, the fire still glowing low, the women still sleeping on thick furs around him. The cabin was heavy with heat, and something else, an expectation he wasn't ready to name. So he left. He scribbled a note, "I need time to think," and slipped out into the chill. The mountain air bit through his shirt, but he didn't stop. He just kept walking, boots crunching frostbitten leaves, trying to clear his head. He didn't make it far. The path twisted where it hadn't before. Familiar trees looked unfamiliar. The trail that had brought him here was gone. A low fog rolled in, and soon even the sky disappeared. It wasn't just disorienting. It was unnatural, like the mountain itself wanted him to stay. By dusk, he was soaked, scraped, starving. He yelled once, a frustrated, cracking shout, but only the wind answered back. When he finally stumbled back toward the cabin, knees buckling, the front door was already open. They had been waiting. All 4 of them stood in the doorway. Not angry, not mocking, just there. Lena stepped forward first. No coat, no shoes, just linen sleeves rolled up to the elbows. Her scarred face unreadable. "We saw your note," she said. "We didn't follow. I thought about leaving," Elias said, voice hoarse. "For good." Vera crossed her arms but said nothing. He looked at them, suddenly feeling impossibly small. "I don't understand what this is. You don't want me for who I am. You want me because of him, because of some old contract." "No," Mira said, her voice firmer than he'd ever heard it. "We waited because of the contract, but we choose now." Elias looked up. "Choose what?" "You," Hilda said. "You, Elias. Not because of blood, not because of promises, because you stayed, because you saw us." He stared at the mud on his boots, the raw skin on his hands, the ache in his ribs. "Even when you ran," Lena said, taking a slow step closer, "you didn't run out of fear. You ran because this matters to you. That's how we know." Vera finally spoke. "We needed to know that if you touched any of us, it would be because you wanted to, not because you thought you had to." Lena reached for his hand, slow, deliberate, leaving plenty of space between them. "If you want to go, we'll guide you down ourselves. No tricks, no storms. You'll be free." Elias didn't answer right away. The women waited. The wind died down. The trees stilled. And then Elias whispered, "I don't want to go." Lena's fingers wrapped around his hand, warm and strong. "That's what we were waiting for," she said. They didn't touch him that night, not in the way he thought they might. Instead, they taught him. Not with words, not really, but with moments, gestures, patience. Mira took him to the forge at sunrise, showed him how to hold the tongs properly, how to bend metal without forcing it. "Strength is nothing without rhythm," she said, voice quiet as she shaped a horseshoe with 3 clean strikes. He didn't speak, just listened, watched, learned. Later, Hilda brought him into the woods to set traps. Her movements were wide and confident. She moved through the trees like she owned them. She handed him a snare and didn't explain it, just watched to see if he would try. He did. Fumbled, failed, tried again. When he finally got it right, she smiled. Just slightly. But it was the first time he saw it reach her eyes. In the evenings, Vera asked him to read aloud. She never said why, just handed him an old book and curled up on the rug beside the fire, head propped on one fist, eyes half-lidded but listening to every word. Once, he glanced over and found her watching his mouth more than the page. Lena, though. Lena was different. She didn't give him tasks. She gave him space, time, quiet. She sat near him while he wrote in his notebook, sometimes braided her hair. Once, she left him a carved figurine, a tiny wooden fox, perfectly balanced on all 4 legs with no note, no explanation. He found himself carrying it in his pocket. The days bled together in the best way. Chores became routines. Routines became rituals. And slowly, something began to grow. Not just attraction, not just curiosity, but belonging. They began to touch him more. Brief things, a hand on his back as he passed through the kitchen, fingers brushing his when they exchanged tools, a thigh pressed slightly too close at the fire. None of it was accidental, but none of it demanded anything from him, either. One night, after a shared stew and the soft hush of firewood crackling, Lena sat beside him on the porch. "Do you know what we talk about when you're not there?" she asked. Elias shook his head. "We talk about who you are, what we've never seen before. You don't push, you don't grab, you don't shrink from us, you listen." He looked at her, really looked. The strength in her jaw, the softness in her eyes, the scar that made her more beautiful, not less. "And we wonder," she whispered, "what it might feel like to be held by someone like you." Elias didn't speak. He reached out and placed his hand gently over hers. She didn't flinch, and neither of them pulled away. It began with silence, not tension, not hesitation, but the kind of quiet that only exists when no one needs to explain anything. The fire burned low. Shadows stretched long across the walls of the cabin. The wind outside had calmed, like the mountain itself was leaning in to listen. Elias stood by the hearth, heart racing but steady. Lena stepped toward him first, slowly, as always, giving him every chance to say no. She didn't ask permission because she didn't need to. He'd already given it. Her hands cupped his jaw with careful precision, rough palms and calloused fingers grazing skin like it was fragile. Elias leaned in, just enough to close the last inch between them. Their first kiss was not delicate. It was unsure, aching, real. When they parted, neither of them smiled. They just breathed deep, honest breaths like something old inside them had finally exhaled. Behind them, Mira moved. Barefoot, quiet, eyes soft and locked on his. Hilda watched from the edge of the room, her posture still for the first time since he arrived. She wasn't jealous. She wasn't impatient. She was waiting. Vera stood last, arms crossed, lips parted not from judgment, but from something closer to awe. They didn't swarm him. They circled slowly, like gravity pulling 4 planets into his orbit, each different, each deliberate. Mira was the first to touch him after Lena. Her hand slipped into his, palm thick and strong, thumb brushing the inside of his wrist. Her eyes asked the question. Elias nodded. One by one, they stepped closer. No rush, no demand. Just 4 women towering, untouched, unsure, and one man who had become something none of them expected. A choice. They guided him to the furs before the fire. Not to conquer, not to consume, but to welcome. Lena lay beside him, facing him, her hand still cradling the back of his head like she thought he might disappear. Mira positioned herself behind him, not touching, just close enough that her warmth pressed against his spine. Hilda knelt by his feet, arms folded across her knees, eyes studying his expression like it held the blueprint for something sacred. And Vera fierce. Reluctant Vera sat near his shoulder, close enough for her breath to graze his skin. They didn't rush. They didn't take. They explored, asked, waited. And when it finally happened, when the space between him and them dissolved, it wasn't primal or wild or loud. It was tender, terrifying, and deeply human. When it was over, no one moved. They lay tangled together like roots under soil, unsure where one body ended and the next began. Elias stared up at the rafters, heart steady, chest full, not claimed, not owned, held. The cabin didn't creak anymore, not like it used to. It breathed. In the mornings, Elias woke tangled in warmth, 4 limbs wrapped around him, massive bodies curled gently against his, each one radiating heat and safety. Mira usually stirred first, easing herself from the pile with the grace of someone who didn't want to wake a single soul. She always left behind a hand pressed to his chest, like a promise. By the time he stepped into the kitchen, the kettle would be on, Mira's forge would already be glowing outside, and Hilda would be wrestling logs in the yard with bare arms and a crooked grin. Vera kept to the ledgers. She was sharper than he ever gave her credit, for all emotion in her eyes, logic in her hands. She tracked trade goods, planting rotations, repairs. Every now and then, she'd pause, glance up, and catch Elias watching her, and she'd almost smile. Lena was the heart of the home. Quiet, scarred, always busy with something: blankets, herbs, tools. She touched him most often now, not possessively, just in passing, a brush of fingers, a hand at the back of his neck, a kiss to his temple when no one was looking. Elias had never felt so needed, or so free. They didn't own him. They simply invited him again and again to stay. And he did. They had formed something no one would understand outside these trees. A new shape for the word family. Not born, built. The old contract was still folded inside the hearth, tucked behind a loose brick. They never mentioned it anymore. It didn't matter. They weren't here because of obligation. They were here because of choice. Even the mountain accepted it. The storms eased. The paths stayed clear. The wild things came closer to the cabin, as if whatever had been unsettled was finally chain whole. One afternoon, as golden light spilled across the porch, Elias sat carving small wooden figures. It had become a habit, a way to mark the days. One for each of them: a hawk for Mira, a bear for Hilda, a fox for Lena, a wolf for Vera, and a small, slightly crooked deer for himself. Not the strongest, not the largest, but swift, careful, gentle. The others watched as he arranged them on the mantel. No one spoke. Then Hilda chuckled softly and nudged his shoulder. "You forgot one," she said. "Which one?" She leaned in close. Her freckles caught the Sunday, the future. They hadn't talked about it, not seriously. But it hung in the air between them now, the way Lena's fingers curled just a little more protectively around her stomach when she rested, the way Mira had been quiet for days, then suddenly building a second water trough, the way they all looked at him like home had already begun to grow. Elias looked around at the women, strong, strange, extraordinary, and the cabin breathed. So did he.